It's the mid-1970s, and you've just walked into a family living room. The walls are covered in wood paneling, the kind that gave every house a warm, slightly golden glow. Your socks sink into thick shag carpet, that deep pile that always seemed to hold on to yesterday's popcorn kernels. In the corner, a big, boxy console television hums faintly, the picture tube glowing as Happy Days flickers across the screen. The sound isn't perfect. Sometimes you have to smack the side of the TV to get the static to settle, but in that moment, it feels like magic. From the kitchen, there's the faint, buttery smell of Jiffy Pop bubbling on the stovetop, that foil dome puffing higher and higher like a little science experiment. Outside, through the screen door, you can hear the rhythmic whir of a bicycle wheel. Some kid zooming past on a banana seat bike with a playing card clipped to the spokes so it rattles like a motorcycle engine. That sound, sharp and fast, was the anthem of every summer street. This was life before smartphones, before streaming, before constant notifications. Music wasn't on demand. It came from a record player, or maybe, if you were lucky, a portable 8-track. Friends didn't send a text. They knew you were home because your bike was tossed carelessly in the front yard. And somehow, it all worked. Somehow, it all felt fuller. The 1970s weren't just a decade on the calendar. They were a mood, a rhythm, a slower way of life stitched together by simple joys. Over the next little while, we're going to step right back into that world, revisiting the toys that sparked our imagination, the school days that shaped our routines, the foods we couldn't wait to unwrap, the shows that glued us to the television, and the household quirks that made every home feel unique. So buckle up, or better yet, hop onto your big wheel, because we're about to relive 25 forgotten things from growing up in 1970s America. And trust me, every single one will feel like coming home. Banana seat bicycles. If freedom had a sound in the 1970s, it was the steady rattle of a baseball card clipped to your bike spokes. Those long banana seats, bright vinyl in colors like fire engine red, lemon yellow, or metallic blue, made every kid feel like the coolest rider on the block. The chrome sissy bars rose up behind you, tall and shiny, giving the bike an almost motorcycle-like feel. Some seats even had wild designs, stars, stripes, or glitter that sparkled in the sun. Riding one down the street, you didn't just pedal, you cruised. The wide handlebars let you lean back like you owned the road, and there was no better feeling than seeing your reflection in a neighbor's car window as you pedaled past. A banana seat bike cost maybe $40 to $60 at the time, which meant birthdays or Christmases often held the promise of that magical moment when your very own bike was wheeled out from hiding. Of course, the rides weren't always smooth. Gravel would chew up your knees if you tipped over, and those little spoke cards wore out after too many adventures. But that was part of the story. Looking back, it wasn't just a bike. It was our first taste of independence. The banana seat made ordinary kids feel extraordinary, and every ride felt like a small victory lap. Lite-Brite magic. There was something magical about turning off the lights, pressing colored plastic pegs into black paper, and watching your creation glow to life. Lite-Brite, first sold in 1967 but wildly popular through the 70s, was like having a neon sign you could design yourself. The soft click of each peg sliding into place was oddly satisfying, and when you finally plugged it in, the hum of the bulb filled the room. The designs were simple: clowns, butterflies, rainbows, but in our minds, they were masterpieces. The smell of warmed plastic drifted from the lamp as the picture glowed, casting soft, colored light across the room. If you were lucky enough to get a new refill pack, it felt like having a whole new world to create. The original sets sold for under $10, but to us, they were priceless. Families would gather around to admire the finished pictures, and sometimes siblings would argue over whose turn it was to make the next design. And even though the black paper templates eventually ran out, we improvised with notebook paper and imagination. Lite-Brite wasn't just a toy, it was a stage for creativity, proof that a little light could turn an ordinary evening into something unforgettable. Rock'em Sock'em Robots. You didn't need boxing gloves when you had Rock'em Sock'em Robots. Those clunky plastic fighters, one red, one blue, stood proudly inside their little yellow ring, waiting for battle. Each time you gripped the levers and pressed the buttons, you could feel the satisfying clunk as your robot threw a punch. The goal? Land the perfect uppercut that made your opponent's head pop straight up with a loud click. The fights were fast, chaotic, and endlessly entertaining. Brothers, sisters, and neighborhood kids would gather around, cheering like it was a heavyweight championship. "He's going down," someone would shout, just as the red robot's head flew skyward. The noise, the tension, and the laughter, it all filled the room like a miniature arena. Introduced in the mid-60s, by the 70s the set could be found in countless homes, usually costing about $8 to $12. For many kids, it wasn't just a toy, it was bragging rights. Winning a round gave you playground status, even if your victory was short-lived. Of course, sometimes a robot's head wouldn't quite stay on, or the levers jammed from too much enthusiastic play. But those imperfections made it ours. Rock'em Sock'em Robots gave us the thrill of competition without anyone leaving the room with a black eye, except maybe your pride. Slinky down the stairs. There's a unique sound burned into every childhood of the 70s. The metallic clink, clink, clink of a slinky making its way down the stairs. It was mesmerizing. You'd set that coiled spring at the top step, give it a little nudge, and watch in awe as it seemed to walk itself down, step by step, like it had a mind of its own. The slinky had actually been around since the 1940s, but in the 70s it was a must-have. It cost just a couple of dollars, making it an easy birthday gift or a quick reward for good grades. You could smell the faint tang of metal on your hands after playing with it, and sometimes the coil left little marks on your skin if you stretched it too far. Of course, the magic had its limits. A slinky tangled faster than shoelaces in a dryer, and once it was knotted, there was almost no saving it. But even with its quirks, the slinky gave kids endless entertainment. Downstairs, across coffee tables, or just being stretched out as far as possible in the backyard. Simple, affordable, and oddly hypnotic, the slinky reminded us that sometimes the most unforgettable toys were the simplest ones of all. Big Wheel Adventures. Few things made you feel cooler as a kid than climbing into a big wheel. That low-slung plastic tricycle, with its oversized front wheel and tiny back tires, turned every sidewalk into a racetrack. The seat was molded plastic, the handlebars squeaked in your grip, and as you pedaled furiously, the hollow plastic wheels made that unforgettable rumbling sound against the pavement. What made the big wheel special wasn't just riding, it was skidding. You'd pedal hard, yank the handlebars, and spin out in dramatic fashion, leaving imaginary tire tracks on the sidewalk. The more daring kids would race down driveways or slalom between trash cans, pretending they were Evel Knievel himself. Introduced by Mark's Toys in 1969, big wheels were affordable, around $25, and quickly became a staple of driveways and cul-de-sacs across America. For many families, they were a safer alternative to bicycles for younger kids, but to us, they felt like Formula One machines. Of course, the wheels wore thin, and the plastic often scraped after too many wipeouts. But those battle scars were badges of honor. A big wheel wasn't meant to last forever. It was meant to be ridden hard, laughed on, and remembered fondly. Looking back, it wasn't just a toy. It was our license to adventure. No training wheels required. Metal lunchboxes. Opening your lunchbox in the 1970s was like opening a little treasure chest of childhood. Those metal lunchboxes weren't just containers, they were badges of identity. You might have Superman, Charlie's Angels, Star Wars, or maybe Scooby-Doo smiling from the front. The glossy paint, the bold colors, and that sturdy metal handle made you feel like you were carrying something important. Inside, of course, was the classic matching thermos. You'd twist the plastic cap, and half the time a bit of warm milk or lukewarm soup had already leaked out. Still, there was comfort in hearing the little clink of the glass liner inside. The sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, the apple that sometimes bruised, the pack of Twinkies or ding-dongs, it was all part of the daily ritual. These lunchboxes cost around $3 to $5 back then, but they carried more than food. They carried pride. You compared yours with your friends, sometimes trading bites of dessert if someone had Hostess cupcakes while you were stuck with raisins. And oh, the sound! A metallic clang when the lid snapped shut, echoing down the school hallway. Metal lunchboxes weren't just practical, they were statements. And every scratch and dent told a story of a childhood well spent. School film strips. Remember the hush that fell over the classroom when the teacher wheeled in that bulky film strip projector? The hum of the machine filled the room, and the faint smell of warm plastic drifted into the air. Film strips were the closest thing we had to on-demand video lessons, though they weren't exactly thrilling. The pictures came frame by frame, projected larger than life on the pull-down screen. And then came the sound we'll never forget, the unmistakable beep. That was your cue to turn the knob and advance the story. If you were lucky, the teacher picked you to run the projector, which felt like the highest honor a kid could get. The content ranged from health lessons to history, often a bit stiff and outdated even then. Sometimes the film would jam or the picture would blur and the class would groan. But the truth is, we secretly enjoyed the break from textbook drills. Introduced in classrooms decades earlier, by the 1970s, film strips were everywhere, teaching millions of kids. Looking back, the technology was clunky, but it carried a kind of charm. The gentle whirring, the dimmed lights, the shared anticipation, they made even the dullest topics feel just a little more exciting. Scratch and sniff stickers. Few rewards in the 70s were as coveted as a scratch and sniff sticker. Imagine it. You finish a math test, the teacher smiles, and suddenly you've got a shiny round sticker on your paper that smells like grape, root beer, or even pizza. To us, these weren't just stickers, they were trophies. You'd rub your fingernail over the surface and hold it up to your nose, giggling as the scent came to life. The grape stickers smelled sweet and candy-like, while the popcorn ones were oddly buttery. Some were hits, others misses, but every new scent was an adventure. They became a kind of classroom currency. Kids traded them like baseball cards, comparing who had the rarest scents or the biggest collection. A full sticker album was like gold, and if you had a scratch and sniff with a smell no one else had, you instantly had playground bragging rights. They first appeared in the early 70s and quickly exploded in popularity, usually sold in sheets for under $1. It wasn't just about the smell, it was the joy of something interactive, something that turned a boring day into a small sensory celebration. Even now, the memory of scratching one open feels like releasing bottled-up childhood happiness. Trapper keepers before trapper keepers. Before the iconic Trapper Keeper arrived in the late 70s and 80s, kids in the early part of the decade had their own way of keeping schoolwork in order. Vinyl zip-up binders and folders with wild psychedelic 70s patterns, think swirls of orange, brown, and avocado green, were the closest thing we had. The sound of that zipper tearing open was instantly recognizable. Inside, the metal rings clamped down on loose-leaf paper, folders bulged with worksheets, and sometimes a secret note or two from a friend was tucked in the pocket. You could feel the slight tackiness of the vinyl cover, the smell of fresh paper mixing with that faint plastic scent. These binders usually cost just a few bucks at the local 5 and dime, but to kids, they were a canvas. We'd plaster them with stickers, doodles, or our favorite band names. Sometimes the zippers would break, leaving your homework spilling across the hallway floor, but even that was part of the experience. They may not have had the sleek design of the later Trapper Keepers, but they had soul. Those early binders were our organizational lifelines, and they carried with them the chaos, creativity, and character of growing up in a 70s classroom. Cursive writing drills. There was no escaping it. Cursive writing practice. Row after row of lined paper, each filled with endless loops of A, or B, B, B. The teacher's chalk squeaked across the blackboard as perfect cursive letters were written out, and we'd do our best to copy them, our pencils pressing grooves into the cheap notebook paper. The smell of chalk dust mixed with the faint waxy scent of crayons drifting from the art shelf nearby. You could hear the constant scratching of pencils in unison, punctuated by sighs of boredom. And yet, there was a pride to it. Filling a whole page with neat, flowing cursive felt like unlocking a secret adult skill. In the 1970s, cursive wasn't optional, it was essential. Teachers believed it shaped discipline and character. And let's be honest, those who mastered it had the prettiest notes passed under desks. Some kids developed elegant looping styles, while others scribbled hurriedly, always a step behind. Whether you loved it or hated it, cursive drills were a universal classroom memory. They weren't glamorous, but they were a rite of passage. Looking back, even the cramped fingers and smudged pencil lines remind us of a time when handwriting wasn't just communication, it was considered an art form. Saturday morning cartoons. Saturday mornings in the 1970s were sacred. You'd wake up earlier than you ever did for school, pour yourself a heaping bowl of Fruit Loops or Captain Crunch, and plop down in front of the TV. The house was still quiet, the sun barely streaming through the curtains, but the screen was alive with Bugs Bunny, Scooby-Doo, and the Super Friends. The colors were bold, the music catchy, and the commercials pure magic. Half the fun was watching toy ads sandwiched between cartoons, convincing you that you needed Stretch Armstrong or the latest Hot Wheels set. The jingles stuck in your head all day. This was before streaming, before DVRs. If you missed it, you missed it. That's why those few precious hours every Saturday morning felt like an event. Kids sprawled on shag carpets across America, cereal bowls balanced precariously, eyes wide as mysteries were solved and villains foiled. The tradition actually began in the 1960s, but the 70s perfected it. Networks built entire lineups around kids, knowing full well the magic of that weekend ritual. And for us, it wasn't just about cartoons. It was about belonging to something bigger. We all shared the same laughs, and all at the same time. Few TV characters defined cool in the 70s quite like Arthur Fonzarelli, better known as the Fonz. With his leather jacket, slicked-back hair, and trademark "A", he became the ultimate icon of Happy Days, which premiered in 1974. The show transported families back to the 1950s, with jukeboxes, drive-ins, and wholesome family values. But let's be honest, most of us tuned in for Fonzie. He could fix a jukebox with a single smack, win any fight without throwing a punch, and somehow make every kid wish they had their own leather jacket. The theme song, Sunday, Monday, Happy Days, rang through living rooms, and for half an hour, the world outside seemed to pause. Even reruns became an event. Families would gather, laughter filling the room as Richie, Potsy, and Ralph got into yet another scrape, with Fonzie there to set things right. By 1977, Fonzie was so popular he even jumped a shark on water skis, a moment that became legendary for TV lovers. But in the 70s, it wasn't silly, it was exciting. Happy Days wasn't just a sitcom, it was comfort food for the soul, reminding us of simpler times even as we lived through them. And the Fonz? He was the epitome of effortless cool we all secretly wanted to be. The Brady Bunch obsession. Here's the story of a lovely lady. If you're already humming the tune, you know just how big the Brady Bunch was. Though it premiered in 1969, it grew into a full-blown cultural phenomenon throughout the 70s. The Brady home, with its split-level design, orange kitchen, and endless supply of perfectly clean clothes, became the dream of countless kids. Who didn't imagine sliding down that staircase railing or sneaking into the attic room Greg turned into his private hangout? The characters felt like friends. Marcia with her popularity, Jan with her struggles, Marcia, and little Cindy with her curls. And of course, the wise parents, Mike and Carol, always ready with gentle advice. Merchandise spilled into toy stores, lunchboxes, coloring books, even dolls. The Bradys weren't just on TV, they were everywhere. And when the Brady Bunch Hour and spin-offs arrived later in the decade, fans happily followed along, even if the magic wasn't quite the same. Watching the Brady Bunch wasn't just entertainment, it was escapism. For half an hour, you could imagine being part of a big, blended family where every problem was solved with love, humor, and a song. And in the uncertain 70s, that comfort mattered more than we realized. Charlie's Angels craze. When Charlie's Angels hit TV screens in 1976, it sparked a craze that defined the late 70s. The trio of glamorous detectives, originally Farrah Fawcett, Kate Jackson, and Jaclyn Smith, were unlike anything we'd seen before. They weren't sidekicks, they were the stars, chasing villains, solving crimes, and looking impossibly stylish while doing it. Every kid on the block suddenly wanted to play detective. Backyards became stakeouts, walkie-talkies buzzed with secret messages, and groups of friends argued over who got to be the Farrah of the team. Farrah Fawcett in particular became a sensation. Her iconic feathered hairstyle was copied endlessly, and her famous swimsuit poster sold millions. She wasn't just a TV star, she was a cultural icon. Episodes often mixed action, humor, and just enough suspense to keep kids and parents glued to the screen. And the theme music, bright, bold, and dramatic, signaled you were in for an adventure. Merchandise quickly followed: dolls, lunchboxes, and trading cards. For a few years, Charlie's Angels weren't just characters on a show. They were role models, heroes, and style icons rolled into one. It wasn't just TV, it was empowerment wrapped in entertainment. And for kids of the 70s, the Angels were proof that television could spark imagination and even a little bit of glamour. Drive-in theaters. Few places captured the magic of the 1970s like the drive-in theater. Picture this. Your family piles into a station wagon, blankets and lawn chairs tossed in the back. The smell of buttered popcorn drifts from the concession stand, mixing with the faint aroma of summer grass. You roll down the window, hang the heavy speaker on the door, and wait for the giant screen to come alive. Double features were the norm, maybe a Disney movie for the kids, followed by something a little spokier for the adults. Fireflies blinked in the distance, kids ran between cars in their pajamas, and parents enjoyed a rare night out without leaving the family behind. Tickets were cheap, often just a few dollars for a whole carload, and the experience was priceless. The picture wasn't always sharp, the sound sometimes crackled, and condensation fogged the windows. But none of that mattered. The drive-in wasn't just about movies, it was about atmosphere. By the late 70s, drive-ins were starting to decline, but for those who grew up with them, the memories never faded. A warm summer night, a flickering screen under the stars, and the cozy comfort of family and friends, that was the real magic of the drive-in. Rotary phones. Before speed dial and smartphones, there was the rotary phone, the heavyweight champion of communication. Just lifting the receiver had a certain gravity. It was solid in your hand, cool against your ear, with that faint scent of plastic and metal wiring. The click-clack-clack as the dial spun back was unmistakable, almost like the phone was sighing after each number you called. You had to memorize numbers. No contact list to save you, and dialing a long one felt like running a marathon. And heaven help you if you messed up the last digit, you had to start all over again. Patience was part of the process. Phones often came in avocado green, harvest gold, or classic beige, matching the 70s color palette perfectly. The curly cord stretched across the kitchen as far as it could go, usually tangled beyond repair. And privacy? Forget it. Everyone in the house could hear you unless you dragged the cord into a hallway closet. Rotary phones cost around $20 to $40 back then, often rented from the phone company. They weren't flashy, but they were dependable. And when you heard that sudden busy signal, you knew your friend was already deep in conversation. Looking back, the rotary phone wasn't just about calling someone, it was about slowing down and making every word count. Wood-paneled TVs. Every living room in the 70s seemed to have one, the giant wood-paneled television set. It was more than a screen, it was a piece of furniture, often taking up half a wall. The cabinet gleamed with varnished oak or walnut, and on top you'd find family photos, a vase of plastic flowers, maybe even a lace doily your grandma insisted belonged there. Turning on the TV wasn't instant. The picture tube warmed up slowly, the screen glowing to life with a faint, static hum. Changing channels meant a loud, satisfying clunk as the dial clicked from 2 to 13. Remote controls existed, but most kids knew the real remote was you, standing by the TV while your parents told you to change the channel again and again. These sets weren't cheap, often costing hundreds of dollars, but they were built to last. Saturday nights were for Lawrence Welk or Carol Burnett, while weekday evenings meant the evening news flickering through that glass screen. There was a warmth to those televisions, both literally, the back of the set radiated heat, and emotionally. Families gathered around them like modern-day campfires. And even with the occasional static lines or blurry picture, those wood-paneled TVs gave us a window into the world, wrapped in 1970s style. 8-track tapes. Before cassettes took over, the 8-track tape was king of music in the 70s. Chunky and rectangular, it fit perfectly into the dashboard of your car or the player in your living room. The moment you slid one in, you heard the soft ka-chunk as it locked into place, followed by the warm, slightly fuzzy sound of Fleetwood Mac, the Eagles, or maybe Donna Summer filling the air. The magic of 8-tracks was convenience. You could finally play full albums without flipping records. But there was a catch. Mid-song, the tape would sometimes click and switch to the next track. You'd be grooving to your favorite chorus when, bam, it cut off and resumed seconds later. Annoying then, charming now. 8-tracks came in cardboard sleeves, often with bold, colorful artwork that gave a preview of the music inside. The smell of new plastic mixed with that faint, musty cardboard scent became part of the ritual of opening a fresh tape. They weren't cheap, usually $5 to $7 each, but in the 70s, nothing beat sliding an 8-track into your car player, windows down, volume up, and cruising down the highway. For us, those tapes weren't just music, they were freedom, captured in plastic, playing out over 4 grooved tracks. Shag carpets. If you grew up in the 70s, chances are your feet sank into shag carpet. It came in wild colors, burnt orange, avocado green, mustard yellow, and the texture was deep and plush, like walking through a field of yarn. Lying on it while watching TV, you could run your fingers through the long fibers, sometimes finding lost crumbs or the occasional Lego piece buried inside. Vacuuming shag was a workout. The long strands swallowed anything smaller than a marble, and pulling the vacuum across it sounded like dragging luggage through gravel. Still, parents swore by it, and decorators claimed it made rooms cozy and modern. Kids didn't care about style. We cared about the feel. Shag was the ultimate spot for board games, naps, or stretching out with a bowl of popcorn during Saturday cartoons. It even doubled as crash padding during roughhousing, though rug burns were a painful reminder not to slide across it in shorts. By the late 70s, shag was everywhere. Living rooms, bedrooms, even stairs. It wasn't practical, but it was unforgettable. To this day, seeing that wild, fuzzy carpet instantly transports you back to the era of lava lamps, beanbags, and a design style that was as bold as comfortable. Beanbag chairs. Beanbag chairs were the unofficial throne of the 70s kid. Big, round, and filled with tiny styrofoam beads, they were like giant sacks of relaxation. You'd plop down into one and instantly sink, the beads shifting under your weight with a soft shh sound. Sometimes you'd disappear so deep it took real effort to climb out again. They came in vinyl covers, often in bright reds, blues, or that ever-present 70s brown. The smell of the plastic was unmistakable, especially in a warm room. If you left one near a sunny window, it would almost stick to your skin when you sat down. Bean bags cost around $30 to $50, making them affordable enough for many families, and they quickly became a staple of dens, rec rooms, and bedrooms. They weren't built for posture, but they were perfect for watching TV, reading comic books, or simply goofing around with friends. Over time, the seams split, and tiny white beads would spill everywhere, clinging to your clothes and floating around the house like snow. Parents grumbled, but kids laughed. It just added to the fun. Beanbag chairs weren't practical, but they were pure 70s comfort. Soft, silly, and endlessly inviting, they reminded us that sometimes the best seat in the house wasn't really a chair at all. Jell-O molds. If there was one dish that screamed 1970s potluck, it was the Jell-O mold. Bright, wiggly, and sometimes downright bizarre, these creations took center stage at family gatherings. The shimmering dessert came in every color, lime green, cherry red, electric orange, and was often shaped in ornate rings or bunt-style molds. The fun started the moment you scooped it onto your plate. It wobbled and jiggled like it had a personality of its own. The sweet, fruity smell hit your nose before the first bite, instantly recognizable. But Jell-O molds weren't always just dessert. In the 70s, people got experimental. Carrots suspended in orange Jell-O, tuna in lemon, even olives floating in lime. Combinations that made kids shudder and parents insist you just try it. A box of Jell-O cost less than 50 cents, making it a thrifty staple for every kitchen. Kids loved the sweetness and the spectacle, while grown-ups loved how easy it was to prepare. You could almost guarantee that any birthday, church supper, or backyard barbecue featured at least one brightly colored mold on the table. Even today, seeing Jell-O wiggle on a plate brings back a wave of 70s memories. It wasn't gourmet, but it was fun, playful, and unforgettable. Tang and space food. Drink what the astronauts drink. That was the pitch for Tang, and in the 70s, kids believed it. This bright orange powder, mixed with water, promised not just a sweet drink, but a taste of outer space. It was invented earlier, but the 70s space race craze made Tang a must-have in American kitchens. The moment you tore open the foil packet, the citrusy scent hit your nose. A spoonful stirred into a glass of water turned it neon orange, fizzing slightly on top. The first sip was tangy, sugary, and just a little artificial, but in the best way. Moms loved it because it was fortified with vitamins. Kids loved it because it felt futuristic. Commercials showed astronauts on Apollo missions sipping Tang, and suddenly your breakfast table felt like NASA headquarters. Tang wasn't the only space-age food in the 70s. Freeze-dried ice cream and foil-packed snacks popped up at science centers and gift shops, feeding our fascination with astronauts. They weren't always delicious, but they were exciting. In truth, astronauts rarely drank Tang in space, but that didn't matter. To kids in the 70s, every sip was an adventure, a small way to join the cosmic frontier. Tang wasn't just a drink, it was imagination in a glass. TV dinners. The 70s brought us the golden age of the TV dinner, a complete meal in a foil tray ready to pop in the oven. Salisbury steak with a side of mashed potatoes, corn, and a brownie in its own little compartment. It was a feast of convenience. The ritual was half the fun. You'd peel back the foil just a little, slide the tray into the oven, and wait while the smell of beef gravy or fried chicken filled the kitchen. The compartments kept everything neat, though the brownie often came out either half burnt or half frozen. But none of that mattered. Sitting on a TV tray in the living room, plate steaming, was a treat. Swanson was the big name, and a TV dinner cost under $1 in the early 70s. For families, it meant no cooking, no cleanup, just dinner and a show. Popular options included turkey with stuffing, spaghetti, and fried chicken, though Salisbury steak became the classic. For kids, it wasn't just the food. It was the thrill of eating in front of the television, something normally reserved for special occasions. The glow of the TV screen, the warmth of the foil tray, the taste of that oddly satisfying mashed potato, it all blended into one unforgettable experience. Pop Rocks candy. Few candies caused as much excitement and controversy as Pop Rocks. First sold in the mid-70s, they weren't just candy, they were an experience. You'd tear open the little foil packet, pour the colorful crystals onto your tongue, and suddenly, snap, crackle, pop. It felt like fireworks going off in your mouth. The sound was loud enough for your friends to hear, and you couldn't help laugh at the fizzing, popping sensation. Flavors ranged from cherry to watermelon to cola, each leaving a sugary aftertaste. The candy aisle had plenty of options, but nothing matched the sheer spectacle of Pop Rocks. Of course, every playground had its rumors. Kids whispered that mixing Pop Rocks with soda could make your stomach explode. An urban legend fueled by the famous Mikey from Life cereal myth. It wasn't true, but it sure made the candy feel dangerous in the coolest way. At about 15 cents a pack, Pop Rocks were affordable thrills. They turned snack time into a science experiment, a little piece of edible entertainment. For many of us, that first crackling bite was unforgettable. It wasn't just candy, it was childhood daring wrapped in a shiny foil packet. Tab Cola. Long before the endless varieties of diet sodas, there was Tab. Introduced in the 60s but exploding in popularity through the 70s, Tab was Coca-Cola's answer to the calorie-conscious craze. The can itself was iconic, pink with bold block letters, and seeing it in your mom's hand felt like a snapshot of the decade. Tab had a distinct taste, Slightly sweet, slightly bitter, with a lingering aftertaste that was, well, unique. Some loved it, others wrinkled their noses, but it became the go-to drink for moms on diets and adults trying to cut back on sugar. The sound of the pop-top can opening, the fizz as it poured over ice, the faint cola scent, it was all part of the ritual. In the fridge, Tab often sat right next to bottles of Fresca or Shasta, a proud symbol of 70s modern living. It wasn't cheap compared to regular soda, but it wasn't about taste alone. Tab was about lifestyle. Ads showed slim, stylish women sipping Tab, promising that you could be a shape he can't forget. For kids, sneaking a sip felt like trying something forbidden, a grown-up indulgence. Today, Tab is gone, discontinued in 2020. But for those who grew up in the 70s, just the sight of that pink can sparks instant nostalgia. It was more than a soda. It was the flavor of an era.